Good evening, all. Are all of no viewers just at the moment, but I am a little bit behind on getting the social media links out, so hopefully we'll have people watching. But anyways, welcome to episode 3 of Vivre L'Empreur. I am the host, Michael Oden, and this is my co-host, Aldous.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. In an age of terrestrial radio being replaced by, any pair of buffoons with a camera and a microphone in that 90s Imus Stern shock jock clones being replaced with quote unquote culture warriors and outrage merchants in an era where the topic du jour is based on approximately 37 seconds of actual research and citations, and often, more than not, corresponds to the take of feelings of nostalgia, replacing facts and figures when adult men surround themselves by toys of yore and speak about concepts that are at best thinly tangentially related to their expertise. Welcome to what is totally not a lecture by two semi-well-adjusted men wearing headphones and talking into microphones about historical outrage mercantilism, where our mutual outrage at the opinions of others is completely unresearched, though our points are woven deeply in the text of Lex Historica.
This,
Thank you for having me, Oden.
this feels like a very weird blend of the Twilight Zone opening and the opening crawl for Law and Order. So
You were late. I had time to write an intro.
I was late. Yeah, that is correct. I was definitely running a bit behind. Today has been freaking nuts. But anyways, today we're taking a little bit of a break. The first two episodes that we did of this show, we were talking about Napoleon's rise and the burning of his star. And today we're going to talk about quite possibly one of his greatest Pyrrhic victories of his entire life in his relationship with Josephine, which is a matter of pretty heated debate in the historical community as to how that relationship blossomed. Some historians will claim that Josephine never loved Napoleon and that she just saw him as a means to an end to maintain her position. But others will claim that while there definitely wasn't a lot of connection at the start, they did actually come to greatly appreciate each other. And there's all sorts of different opinions on this. But the universal thing is that Napoleon fell head over heels for Josephine. And at least at the very beginning, those feelings were not particularly reciprocated. It was a marriage of convenience. And so we're going to get to talk a bit about that, and it's going to be a pretty good time. And all this is going to be over here just kind of going, man, I have all these facts about Napoleon's military reforms and all of this stuff that I could be getting that I could put to good use. And we're talking about pillow talk between Napoleon and one of his.
No, I think it adds to the discussion. I think there's nothing when you talk about the glory of Napoleon, when you talk about all of the brilliant strategic maneuvers that he made throughout his career, when you talk about how he reorganized the army, when you talk about how he raised commanders up and how he structured his command and control mechanisms, how he has developed the core system flawlessly, master of logistics. The revolutionary utilization of the Laguerre companies within each battalion and their deployment at a 3-pace to a 5-pace system instead of the 2 to 3-pace system that the British used, the deployment of grouped fire and organized control fire, the logistics of horse artillery and the application of horse artillery as mobile gun platforms in the Napoleonic system, the revolutionary use of both lancers and hussars in non-harassing roles. Well, let's just table all that, and we'll talk about Josephine. I think that's a great idea.
It's okay, Aldous. Whoa, holy shit, what was that?
That was the gods telling you this is a mistake.
Probably not inaccurate. I am very confused as to what just happened. one of my books fell. Okay, that's certainly fun. I'll have to figure out how that happened. But anyways, it's okay, Aldous, because all of those things that you're talking about are clearly just manifestations of Napoleon's sexual frustrations with Josephine. So it's all good.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure that's let us explore how we get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we did our first stream, we talked a bit about Napoleon's up and coming star as kind of a member of secondary nobility from Corsica. So he kind of came from this upper middle class family, but they didn't have a lot of money. And so one of the ways that you would get more money is to marry. And Napoleon had some romantic dalliances as a young man, most of which did not end particularly well for him. There's a lot written about like Napoleon trying to go and write poetry and become like a romance novelist and it not working out particularly well for him. But he had a weird reputation with the women in France. He had an Italian accent, which made him kind of the butt of the joke in social circles, which I think Aldous even touched on a bit. Is you had that whole old ancien regime mentality of of social hierarchy and social classes, and Napoleon was very much from the get-go cutting against the grain when it came down to that establishment.
Right. Think of it this way, if you're not at all comfortable with what Mike just kind of laid out there. He's of high enough birth to be there, but he doesn't have the societal connections. He doesn't have the cultural education. He's got the military education, but not the cultural education. When I say that, his family was not rich, so he didn't go to all the parties in Paris. He doesn't know everybody. He doesn't know decorum. He's a Corsican. Plus, on top of all that, now he's so much different. You add a little bit of an Italian accent onto that. Now he's even more different. And he's been in and out of the power structure prior to the Italian campaign of favorability. So he's never had the light shown on him up until Italy. After the Italian campaign, the spotlight is brightly shining down upon him. And even before that, when he's put in charge of the army, his fortunes begin to change. And there is some documented evidence that people began to kind of take him a little bit more seriously socially at that point, only because of his upward mobility, which is where the historians draw. That's why Josephine latched onto him.
Yeah, well, and that's where it comes down to. So that now we enter in one Josephine de Beauharnais. I probably butchered that. She was a member of French nobility. She was actually born in one of the French tropical colonies in Martinique. And she had been in and out of the social strata in Paris for the past few years through the revolution. And there was a slave revolt in Martinique that led to her vacating to Paris permanently. And then her husband passed away, I believe, in 1794, and she was a widow with 2 children.
Yes. Well, he didn't just pass away. He lost his head.
Yes. to be indelicate, yes. He was a victim of the Committee of Public Safety.
Both Josephine and her husband were imprisoned, and he lost his head. She was released following his execution because they had children.
Correct.
That keeps getting funnier every time.
And so, as you can imagine, Josephine, in trying to maintain her social status, she had a bit of a reputation of passing between partners, to put it delicately.
She a hoe, to put it in delicately.
She was. She was very charismatic, very much a socialite, and she would she would frequently go between different romantic partners, everything like that, and that was not uncommon, especially in Parisian court at that point in time and even beforehand. And entered young Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's honestly like a story as old as time, as you've got this guy who's newly commissioned, and is, falls in love with effectively the town's strumpet. And literally the moment that he gets his first command in Italy, one of the first things that he does is he marries Josephine. And it's really funny because when you read the descriptions of Napoleon by his direct subordinates in Italy, they all make fun of him for effectively how whipped he is for Josephine. And while Napoleon certainly has a flame for Josephine, she does not really, like, there is definitely a period of time during their courtship where she is enamored with Napoleon. However, she very quickly starts entertaining other suitors and has multiple different lovers, one of whom Napoleon will actually end up beating on the battlefield. He was an Austrian cavalry officer.
Yes, indeed. Well, taking a step back too, just so you understand, I guess her thoroughbredness when you talk about who she's connected to and what family she comes from. Members of the current royal families of Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, and Norway, and I believe the Prince of Luxembourg, all are direct descendants of her first marriage. The children from her first marriage, they are all descendants of those children. So, in one way, shape, or form, but they are all related. So that's how deep this bloodline goes, that it is still tied to modern royalty.
Yeah, 100%. And so, she is an incredibly important figure, even within Napoleon's life. And there is definitely something to say about Josephine as a character in the Napoleonic story. And I like it. Like, it is an interesting thing to discuss. Because
she gives him a little bit of that cultural, social acceptance by marrying. It's legitimization as much as he can be legitimized because of his upbringing by associating with him. Now, the fact that she's been married before is not as big of an issue as you think. This isn't Victorian England. This is revolutionary France. There's a lot of widows.
Right now. Well, then that's what I was even about to say is, like, even in French court, like, it's one thing if you went through a divorce, that is, that's scandal. But even if it were, the husband had passed away during campaign and wasn't a member of, society that was executed by the Committee of Public Safety, remarrying after being widowed wasn't really looked upon poorly. The thing that was controversial about Josephine was she got around.
Well, I think you have to clarify even that, because it was, again, this is revolutionary France. It's not Victorian England. There's understandable levels of getting around. She got around well outside of the second deviation of acceptable levels. She's in that end, 2 standard deviations away, the very end of the histogram.
100%. And she is, one of my favorite videos on Napoleon when they talk about Josephine and everything is oversimplified, and the way that they put it is like Napoleon's all excited about this marriage and everyone's going, "Oh, you're getting married to Josephine? She's a great kisser." And everyone's just like, "Oh yeah, she's a fantastic kisser. She's great." And Napoleon's getting all upset and goes, "Is there anybody my wife hasn't kissed?" And they go, "Yeah, you." And he gets upset. But that's very much what it was. Is Josephine had this philandering reputation, and I don't know if I can't imagine that Napoleon didn't know about it going into it, and whether he just knew about it and ignored it, or what have you, or was just completely blindsided by her charming demeanor and her beauty, that he wasn't paying attention. I can't really speak to it. But Napoleon was absolutely smitten with this woman, and he will be pretty loyal to Josephine outside of a few instances where he tries to get back at her.
Whoa, come on. Pretty loyal? Okay. Well, this is how loyal she was. They get married, and he heads off to campaign in northern Italy and start a phenomenal military career, one that revolutionizes French military organization and army structure. She almost immediately hooks up with a hussar lieutenant.
Yeah, she's immediately getting.
I mean, it's vague, but I mean, it took him a couple days to get to Italy. So whether that was before he even left the country or while it was still in, we're not sure. But it's almost immediate.
He was already there as an aide de camp to somebody. So, more than likely, they were already, in the middle of stuff behind Napoleon's back. There's no arguing that Josephine had latched onto Napoleon because she saw his potential to rise up through the ranks, but she had no intention on being faithful to him. It's not until after Napoleon becomes first consul that Josephine starts to take their marriage seriously.
Arguable again, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say, but compared to how Josephine acted at the beginning, she may as well have been a committed wife by the time, after Napoleon becomes first consul.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Comparatively, they're also French, so that plays a big role into it as well. They're French, for sure. French high society folk.
Well, and we haven't touched on it either, but I mean, she was 6 years Napoleon's senior, and
that's true.
It is also notable that on their marriage certificate, she lies about both of their ages. She lowers her age by she lies. Awesome. Yeah, she lies about her own age by making herself younger by several years, and then ages up Napoleon so that it makes him look like the age difference is slightly more respectable. So it's at the forefront of her mind, at least this is my interpretation of it, it always goes back to the socially acceptable aspect.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing of note is for Napoleon's family, a family that was doing everything they could, clawing finger and nail and bone to climb the proverbial social French ladder. His mother and family was aghast that of all people, he would marry Josephine, a widower with 2 children that offered, from their perception, nothing in the forms of upward or tangential mobility or any benefit. But it does help him in the long term.
It does, actually. Yeah, 100%. We do have some people that have joined us in the chat. And by some, I mean one. We have Neff has joined us. He says, Odin, are you going to let Aldous have some airtime this episode? Hold on one damn second. During the Italian campaign, Aldous rocked that show. That was Aldous' show all the way. He had way more than I did. And it was great because Aldous, as much as I love this stuff, Aldous has a level of historical background and research on it that goes well beyond anything that I do.
Someday you might be published on this too, Odin. It's okay.
That's fair. And we do have a second. We have Crazy Mad. And so we have two victims of our 19th century romantic gossip about Napoleon Bonaparte and his. Is she really the empress? Because he divorces her pretty quickly after becoming emperor.
She's still the empress.
Really?
She is the empress. Yes.
Because I know that
she's the queen regent of Italy.
Yeah, I knew that. No, like she's absolutely queen regent of Italy, but I was fairly certain that after the War of the Second Coalition and the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, he divorces Josephine to marry the daughter of the previous Holy Roman Emperor of Austria.
No, and when Pope Pius, I think it was Pius VII. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pius VII. When Pius VII crowns Napoleon, Napoleon is crowned first, and then he stands up and takes the crown and places it upon Josephine's head.
You're right.
She is the empress.
She is
of
the empress. That's
pure
even
technicality.
Pure technicality. That's even what I have as like the thumbnail for the show. That was a dumb comment to make. But I like the. Josephine is a very interesting character. But anyways, getting back to the fun stuff. So Napoleon goes through these massive military victories in Italy and kind of redefines his political standing. And around that time is when you have, let's see, he goes to Egypt first and then he comes back for the coup, right? Aldous.
After Italy, he comes back briefly, and then he goes to Egypt. He's in Egypt. While in Egypt, he has an affair. He has at least one confirmed affair with a subordinate officer's wife.
Yeah.
The suspicion is that there was more than one. And while he's doing that, the rift is already formed. His adoration for her ends like midway through the Italian campaign when he finds out what's going on back at home.
Well, yes and no, because he's like he will write to her one letter and accuse her of being like a slut and a strumpet, and then the next letter he'll be like, "I'm sorry, I still yearn for you," and everything like that. Like he's very conflicted about it. I don't think Napoleon ever stopped really caring about Josephine. And I do know that by the time he does actually divorce her to marry the Holy Roman Emperor's daughter. They had actually become quite fond of one another. Josephine is supposedly wept when the divorce happened. She completely understood why it had to happen and she respected it, but they had developed a pretty serious bond by that point.
Yeah, I would say it became one of those marriages that wasn't. I can't say respect, because to Napoleon's own hand, when Josephine dies, he's quoted as saying, "I truly loved my Josephine, but I did not respect her." So he never respected her, but it was possibly a mutual, just beneficial situation. They both benefited each other in one way, shape, or form. He did definitely care about it. You can't argue that point. Her name was his final word on his deathbed. He, to France, to Léonie, to Josephine, and he dies. Yep. So to your point, yes, it's one of those tragic, wonderful love stories that you want to sit down and watch with your wife, but you're going to fall asleep halfway through, and you're going to wake up and just see the end and go, "Oh, that's touching." But in the grand scheme of things, there's a whole lot more interesting shit going on around this. But beyond that, she also, during his exile, his second exile, she approaches, I forget who it was. She approaches somebody and pleads with them to let her go, to be by Napoleon's side. And that's like she caught pneumonia shortly thereafter and passes away. And so that's the tragedy, is she possibly got sick and caused the terminal illness that she died from by begging to go and be with him. So again, whether that was out of a love or a respect or whatever you want to say, she did do that, and that was
Yeah,
her
like
final
again,
major act.
that's where the debate obviously comes in. As I said, like this is actually when you go and you do the research on this, the relationship of Napoleon and Josephine is one of the most weirdly contested historical debates on at what degree of care that they had for one another. Like it's very obvious from the start that Josephine really just saw this guy as a way to maintain her relevancy at French court. But as he became more important and as he rose through the ranks, and it he was kind of like a gravity well of admiration. And like as Aldous has mentioned in previous streams, one of the things that's truly unique about Napoleon is he conquered the not only by the military, but he was beloved by everyone. Like when you're looking at the initial wars of the coalition up until I'd say the Peninsula campaign, Napoleon is viewed on the continental side of Europe as a liberator. He is the good guy.
Well, yeah, but let's stop there. I mean, the Peninsula campaign. It's in Spain. I mean, that's not even a secondary front. That's a tertiary front. That doesn't really matter.
But the point is that for all intents and purposes, Napoleon was he was loved by the French people, but he was also loved by the European people as a liberator. He had great PR, which is something that Aldous has touched on. Notably, he controlled, 2 or 3 newspapers.
He created 3 newspapers during the Northern Italy campaign. Basically, every time he liberated or conquered a city or freed it from any threat from the Austrian army, he would always found a paper and immediately start printing basically just glorified pamphlets of praise upon himself, and then always made sure that those got their way back to Paris. Through, again, his brilliant logistical maneuvering that we are not talking about tonight.
So Frequency Girl is posting his Neff saying if Napoleon really loved her, he wouldn't have divorced her just to get an heir for his line. That's not a beautiful love story. That is trash. I never said that it was a beautiful love story. What I said was it is widely contested as to what degree these two people gave a shit about each other. Like Napoleon, at the end of the day, Napoleon's marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor's daughter was more than just getting a legitimate heir. It was putting an end, a cessation to hostilities on the continent of Europe under Napoleon. And Josephine even understood that. And she she was upset about it, but she knew. And that's one of the things where, again, it really does come into the whole debate on at what degree did these people care? Because we're also talking about a time where marriages were, especially in that social strata, more political than they are anything else.
No, and I think it speaks volumes too that you really have a story when you're talking about Napoleon of a man who he doesn't fit in, and he's always not striving to fit in, but he's looking for acceptance or justification almost for his accomplishments in a social setting. And really that second marriage cements it, because now he finally gets the respect of not just the upper crust, but actual other monarchs.
It makes him a legitimized force to be reckoned with. It's no longer, oh, you're some upstart on the in France. We'll take you down eventually. It's no, he's a solidified dynasty. And that marriage legitimizes him in a lot of socio-political ways. So that's the big thing with Josephine is, again, it's you have these people that are constantly just doing their worst to each other initially, and eventually they do grow incredibly fond of one another. And the question that you see in modern historians was that genuine legitimacy? Like, was that genuine and legitimate feelings, or is it, as Aldous put it, both of them were just using one another for their respective positions? And there's probably a bit of both in there.
Yeah, if you could pull up Nefarious's last comment here, I do want to.
The world may never know. Personally, I don't think adulterous, heartless, and narcissistic manlets really have a beautiful love story anyway. It's certainly not one you want to sit down and watch.
There's very, I mean, yeah, there's slight narcissistic tendencies. A lot of what he is doing, he honestly believes in based off his writings.
100%.
He is not, this is not just for him. Yes, he's benefiting, and yes, he takes pleasure in that. I mean, after all, later in life, he is quoted as saying, "Power is my mistress." But which also it cuts to the quick pretty fast of where he was at later in life with his feelings about the marriage, if not necessarily the person of Josephine. But when you're talking about his motivations for doing this, he truly believes he's doing the right thing. And arguably, he is. He's upsetting the apple cart of centuries of unjust rule across the continent of Europe. And he's making things level. Again, like I mentioned before, if you take the Napoleonic Code in early 19th century Britain and actually employ that, their society collapses worse than you see it collapse at the turn of the century between the 19th and the 20th century. It would be devastating for their way of life because of how much graft and corruption and grift were a part of the Lord system. So it's a fundamental threat.
And like that's the other big thing is like, and a lot of the institutions that Napoleon put in place are still used today because they are effective and they're pretty damn good. The Code Napoleon is still used in several schools across Europe today, and is the basis of a lot of legal systems in Europe. Like the guy definitely had narcissistic tendencies. That kind of comes into any person that's put into that position. And I would say by the later points of his life, those things you could argue were more prominent. But like as Aldous had put with, power is my mistress. I'm trying to think of another good quote of his that kind of illustrates that in the later period. I mean, like obviously when the revolution ends and he becomes emperor, you have the famous the revolution is over, I am the revolution.
Yes.
But like I honestly don't even know. Like, yes, that sounds narcissistic, but Napoleon does kind of live up to that promise. He brings in all of his reforms are the things that were meant to be established at the beginning of the revolution in 1789, but got completely tailspinned out of control with the rise of the Committee of Public Safety and the fall of the Bourbons and everything like that. And it was just a massive catastrophe of a whole bunch of different things going on at once. Between, you had the war in Austria, collapse of the royal family, complete social hierarchical change, the people of Paris realizing their own political weight. Like there was just a lot of things that contributed to this big cocktail that blew up in everybody's face between 1790 and 1794. And Napoleon comes in and effectively rewrites the ship.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think it's important to note, too, because we're drifting a little bit here away from the topic du jour. But so especially after they get married and Napoleon's rise to power is his ascension is on its almost to its apex. If not, he's already the emperor. Josephine does one thing that's amazing, and she becomes a huge patron of the arts. And she reinvigorates the French artistic movement. And it's everything from tapestries to clothing to painting to sculpture. She is at almost the same level of, I would say, like what Jefferson did to a degree of her appreciation and admiration for art and culture. And you see a huge renaissance during this period of truly French, like classic French architecture and paintings. And it's a huge boon because it's one aspect that the La Revolution never really accomplished. And that was revolutionizing those ideals across the spectrum in art. And that does accomplish itself under Napoleon's emperorship. And primarily it's because of Josephine.
100%. And I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, during the like early days of the revolution, you had like artists like David, who would do things like, yeah, obviously you had the very famous portrait of the death of Marat. And you know, that guy would also, like, David would like design, you know, I'm not sure if you've seen these all. I'm sure you have, like, the drawings that David did of like, this is what the Republican citizen should wear, like trying to redefine Republican style as this like a blend of late 18th century, early 19th century fashion and classical Roman like togas and bronze breastplates and stuff. Right. That was just absolutely gaudy and ridiculous. But Josephine does come in, and she is this massive patron of the arts, and she helps Napoleon in this artistic revival in France. And it is fantastic. You get some beautiful work. There's some excellent portraits of Josephine. What I do find very interesting, that I found when I was trying to put together the thumbnail for this video, is there are a lot of portraits that Josephine commissions of herself, and there are a lot of portraits that Josephine commissions of Napoleon. There are very few pieces of them together.
Yes, that is correct.
And I think that speaks a lot too.
Well, part of that is also he was, I guess the most kind way you could put it is he was an absentee husband. I mean, he's never around. He's always off campaigning. And this is a man it's not a hobby. It's not his profession. He's consumed by it. Every aspect of what he does as the leader of the Grand Army is important to him, to the point that he would go 3 to 4 hours with sleep and then wake up and work, and then take a nap and then work more. He's documented as being borderline exhausted at multiple battles at the end because he doesn't sleep the nights before as he's going through his tactical plans. This is beyond anything. I mean, you talk about early on, he had an obsession with Josephine. His mistress truly was war, and
100%. And that's a really interesting point, because like you would think that at least during that period where he is so infatuated with Josephine, I mean, these are going right in hand with him commissioning paintings of himself doing these heroic deeds. But I mean, we also know that Napoleon had an appreciation for classical literature, and one of the big themes that, you know, he really connected with were obviously the military side of things, but there was a romantic side. We know that Napoleon tried his hand as a romantic novelist at a point in time. But so I do find it interesting that even during this period of time where he is so infatuated with Josephine, there are like the portraits that we have of them together are from much later in his career. There's like nothing of, you know, like the initial courtship, you know, and that's something that I would have thought that like a young Napoleon Bonaparte would have absolutely had commemorated.
Oh, for sure. And I, you know, kind of going through my notes here, I mean, one of the other things that I do want to mention about the mutual respect and stuff is after he divorces her and Napoleon II is born, he does arrange in kind of a little bit of a subterfuge way for Josephine to meet his son. And the child and the quote is, the child that cost her so many tears. So he does have, there is definite care there. And it's just, it's a very nuanced thing when you kind of go through all these different stages of their life, because there's also periods of time where he doesn't talk about her. She's not in any of his writings. And then she'll show up again for a period of time and then disappear again. So it's a very up and down And we'll spend a little bit of time, I'm sure, in a future episode on the tragedy of Napoleon's lineage and what happens there. But
Yeah. Well, like, absolutely. His son dies in battle, doesn't he?
no, he dies of tuberculosis in Vienna.
That's right.
He never actually saw combat. He got his commission and then he immediately fell ill with TB and then died of
Yeah,
consumption. Which I always thought
that's.
consumption was a better name than tuberculosis. Like we should have
I
never let that
agree.
go.
I like it. The moment I found, because you watch like old time films and they talk about, oh, they got consumption, and the moment I like broke the code that meant tuberculosis, I'm like, man, that is a way more dramatic name. Like, that is absolutely horrifying.
Well, and to talk too about some of what was Josephine's influence upon Napoleon. When you're talking about the Napoleonic Code did. If you read contemporary stuff, because of the bent of third wave feminism, they will hold that the Napoleonic Code retarded women's rights across the Republic of France, and that I don't think it could be further from the truth. It advanced them in so many ways. As Napoleon, spreads La Liberté across Europe, you've got people that have never had any rights at all. That suddenly, in the event that, like, if you're an unmarried daughter, property is now equally distributed amongst you. If your parents die, like that's unheard of in Europe. Eldest son always got it.
Yeah.
The benefits that were doled out, were they extreme? Are we talking full suffrage? No, absolutely not. But it's revolutionary for the time. It's more than you're going to find even across the ocean in America at the time, for the rights that the code is giving here. So it's and that arguably, and you can find historians that are split on each way, as some of that is Josephine's influence for sure, whispering in Napoleon's ear and saying, you should do this. It's interesting to note that one of the things that he spends the most amount of time on, though, are the conditions for divorce. So before, as they're putting them through, that is one thing, and it's one of the rare times that you really see Napoleon get interested in actual governance. He's really interested in the topic of divorce and what should the claims be. And whether that's for his own reasons at the time, and he's looking forward.
I could definitely see it, especially with how the divorce laws were under Code Napoleon. It's kind of like it's interesting even for the time. You're like, man, boy, does it kind of suck to be a woman in these divorce proceedings, and like it would suck anyway, but like it can be pretty damn brutal. But like that's it's definitely a really interesting thing. And so we're coming up on 45 minutes. And so I think that this is actually a really good time to bring this up, because today, and I sent Aldous the picture of this earlier, we got an official update on the Napoleon movie that Ridley Scott's been doing with Joaquin Phoenix, that's been through developmental hell. Like, it started production, like 3 years ago?
Yeah, it's
been... That sound about right?
It's been, God, I want to say over half a decade, easy, that it's been talked about.
Because that one, you're talking about Steven Spielberg's adaptation of Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon.
No.
That one's been about a decade.
That's been 2 decades, because that started right after Spielberg finished AI. He started working on that, and that'll never get off the ground.
Well, and that's getting pushed forward now too. That one's starting actual pre-production now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're starting. They have casting calls and everything going on. We should actually, like, Napoleon, the Stanley Kubrick Napoleon series. Steven Spielberg is actually moving forward on it now. And then Ridley Scott's Napoleon, which I guess was initially its working title when it was first started, was actually Marengo. Had a massive update today. So we're going to pull this up, and it's actually pertinent to our conversation because we get our first kind of synopsis of what this movie is going to be. And Josephine is going to be a pretty big part. So for those of you guys who don't know, Ridley Scott's been working on a Napoleonic War biopic on obviously Napoleon Bonaparte, where we have Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon, which I honestly find is a very I love Joaquin Phoenix as an actor. And I think that he's probably going to knock this out of the park. But I do find it interesting that they picked him, considering that this is actually supposed to be Napoleon at the beginning of his career, which is odd. As Joaquin Phoenix has got to be in his 50s at this point.
Yeah, beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, fair enough. But so this is the first official look of the film, the first official still released, and it will be released on Apple TV during this upcoming Thanksgiving, and apparently, let's see, where is it written here? I want to make sure that I don't. Napoleon is described as an original and personal look at Napoleon's origins and his swift, ruthless climb to emperor, viewed through the prism of his addictive and often volatile relationship with his wife and one true love, Josephine, played by Vanessa Kirby. So this is actually going to be a pretty interesting take on Napoleon, I think. That will either be really, really good or really, really shit, and there's not going to be any middle ground. And that's kind of how Ridley Scott films go. That you either get Gladiator or you get Robin Hood.
Very true, very true. You could also get the Duelist, or whatever, the Last Duel or the Duelist, both of which are beautiful films.
Yeah, I loved The Last Duel. And I actually have seen The Duelist. I completely forgotten about that movie, and then I saw a different poster than the one that I had been seeing when I had looked it up, and I was like, "Oh shit! I absolutely have seen that. That's the one with the two French cavalry officers that have this feud that goes through the French Revolution, Napoleonic era, the return of the Bourbons, and then Napoleon again, and then finally ends with them having the actual duel at the very end."
Yeah, no, it's probably Harvey Keitel's best movie. It's truly a great story, but the acting is out of this world. It's early. It's back when Ridley could really pull a performance out of somebody instead of kind of the paper structure thin stuff that he's been doing lately. But no, it's a great one. So hopefully he returns to form on this, because that'll be something special.
And that's the thing that I'm actually that I was actually pretty excited about, was that Ridley Scott was doing an interview a while back and was talking about how involved Joaquin Phoenix was in handling Napoleon, where he was just watching his military rise through the eyes of Josephine, is an intriguing one. I don't know how you are going to end up pulling off any of the epic battle sequences that you should, because Josephine wasn't at any of those. But it is definitely an interesting take to have, especially when you're focusing on a young, brash Napoleon Bonaparte that's doing all of this stuff not just to legitimize himself, but in a sense add to his tales of gallantry and his pursuit of this woman that really isn't all that interested in him. But we are coming up on an hour.
For sure. If I could, I would like to share one last little note. Throughout their marriage, one of Napoleon's frustrations was Josephine's spending. As I said, she was a patron of the arts, and she's quoted multiple times as saying, "Only my debts got between us," and it was a constant issue. If you read some of their writings, that he was just her spending was extravagant, not nearly to the degree of Marie Antoinette, but it didn't bankrupt France, but it certainly hurt Napoleon's pocketbook. But one of the coolest things she did do is she bought Chateau de Montmartre, and it went through. Say it was destroyed almost completely during the Franco-Prussian War. But it is where Napoleon, after she died, that's his last residence in France. And King Ferdinand II's widow, of the King of Spain, she owned it for a period of time. And man, I think it was the early 20th century. It was completely redone. It was a massive French recovery project. And it's a beautiful grounds. If you ever get a chance, I highly recommend to go see it if you find yourself in Paris.
Yeah.
It is absolutely beautiful. And one of the things that was done when they redid it is Napoleon, much to Napoleon's chagrin, Josephine brought in British gardeners. And it's one of the few chateaus in and around Paris that has a British-styled rose garden. And so take that however you will as a closing shot, that Josephine hired a British gardener to do their personal residence while he is in Egypt fighting the British. So
absolutely. It was a great final anecdote. Thanks so much for everyone that's joined us this evening. We are going to cut out a little bit early because I've got an early freaking day tomorrow. And honestly, as fun as this topic is, it's definitely a really short one by comparison. Aldous, thanks so much for hanging out with me again. We're going to have a much more action-packed episode next week as we get into Egypt and talk about Napoleon and what Egypt really did for Napoleon.
Yeah, it's Napoleon in Egypt, or how you can win every land battle and still lose the war.
Yeah. Well, like that's the thing is it's Egypt is such an interesting thing because while he technically did lose, there was a lot he gained from Egypt that really makes it a victory in and of its own self. In a completely different, it may not have been a military victory, but what he is able to get from Egypt allows him a platform that will cement his rise to emperor. And so that's going to be a fun thing to talk about. But anyways, you guys, thanks so much for coming to hang out with us tonight. Aldous, thanks so much for hanging out with me and doing the show. I have even gotten a special shirt for the show from the Oversimplified store. My Napoleon average height for the time T-shirt. So I'll be wearing this shirt on Monday nights.
Are they sponsoring
for our
the show?
Streams?
Are they sponsoring the show?
They aren't, but I like it. Like,
don't promote their product. Look, guys, these people aren't, until they sponsor the show. They are garbage. Their products are trash. We don't anything they make.
I love their stuff. I will happily support
anything
them.
that anybody makes until they sponsor the show.
Fair enough. Anyways, you guys have a great night, and we will see you next week.
Take it easy, y'all.